Hi there. Welcome to the Wordsmith Forge Christian Fiction Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Baines. This is the place where you meet the storytellers behind the stories you love and the ones you haven't discovered yet. If you're tuning in for the first time, I'm thrilled that you found us. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. And don't forget to hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. We really appreciate every like and every comment. It's one of the best ways we know that what we're doing is making a difference. I do my best to reply to every comment. You can ask around. My loyal 2 fans will back me up. I have a smiley face on my teleprompter there. All right. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Today, my guest is Dan Walsh, and I know you're going to enjoy this interview. Well, hi, Dan. I'm so glad that you were able to join us for this episode, and I know that our listeners will be very interested in watching this. So if you don't mind, go ahead and give us an introduction to yourself.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks for inviting me. I'm glad we were able to get it to work out schedule-wise. I am a author of, I guess, full-time now, 15 years. I'm working on my 30th novel, 29 novels on Amazon. The first 13 of those were published traditionally by a fairly large Christian fiction publisher. And then in 2014, at the end of my contract, before we renewed the next series of books, made the decision to go indie or go on my own and not renew the contract with them. Mm-hmm. And that was due to a lot of things happened. When I first got published, I was actually a pastor for 25 years. And from that was up through 2010, from 1985 to 2010. The last 3 years of that, I was starting to experience what they call burnout. And so, in coming back from a conference for pastors, and one of the topics was how to overcome burnout. One of the things they talked about was pastors typically don't relax enough. They don't do enough that refreshes them. They're always, even in there's no clock in, clock out aspect to the job. So you're never unwinding, never, refreshing. So they just recommended strongly that you come up with something, a hobby of some that that really refreshes you, has nothing to do with ministry. And on the way home, my wife reminded me when we met, shortly after high school, how much I loved to write. And I actually, back in 11th grade, thought I was going to be writing novels for my career. That's really, if you asked me back then, that's what I thought I'd be doing with my life, not being a pastor. But I got radically converted to Christ in my senior year of high school. And that sort of resulted in me just having a craving and a hunger to know God and to read the Word. And the whole ambition to write novels and all that kind of fell by the wayside. And I experienced what people call a call to ministry experience at 19, and then prepared for that. And then about age 28, became a pastor full time. And then that's what I did for the next 25 years. And I always loved fiction. I kept reading it all those years, but the idea of writing it was just, there's not even a chance of it happening. It was too busy. I imagine that maybe God would let me do it when I retired. That's kind of what I thought. So I just read fiction, on the side as a hobby, and then, like I said, here I was, fast forward 22 years, I'm burning out. And the recommendation was, I remember reading about how Churchill loved to paint to relax, during all the crisis he went through. So I thought, writing might be the thing. So that's what I did. I started. My kids were older. They hadn't left home yet, but they're teens and are mostly hanging out with their friends and youth group and things. They weren't like needing me to be, playing with them on the rug. So my wife was perfectly supportive, and so I would that happened to be a Christmas time when all this happened, and I got the idea for what became my first novel, The Unfinished Gift, then. And I started writing it from the Christmas time all the way through the summer in my spare time. And each chapter I'd write, I'd read it to my wife to get feedback, and she loved it. She was like, "This is amazing." Well, of course, that's your wife. Because but knowing my wife, she's very encouraging, but she also loves me enough, and that's how she was all those years of pastor. She would never let me say something nice to me that wasn't true to make me feel good. She would regularly, if there's any problems in my preaching or anything, disconnects, whatever, on the way home, very gently, I'd hear it. So I knew that her approval was significant to me, that I was maybe on the right track. And after I finished the novel, again, I hadn't been to a writer's group. I hadn't been to a critique group, a conference. I was a pastor. That was my world. I didn't know anything about publishing or any people who were in that world. So back then, it was the traditional publishing world. It was pre-Amazon, you could say. And the only way to get published, books were in the bookstores. If you wanted to get published, you had to go get a mainstream publisher, and the only way to get that was to get a high-level agent who could shop your book to the publishers. And I found all that out back then. The internet was mainly AOL. If you remember back when AOL was the internet, everybody who seemed to, I didn't even know what the internet was. I knew AOL. And so I went on AOL, and they had a Christian writers board, and that's where I got my information about what the process was. And it was pretty discouraging when I read, pretty much saying, this is, you might expect, 40, 50 rejection letters. It's going to be years, maybe, perhaps, before you finally get an agent to take you on, a good agent who can actually connect you with a good publisher. And that was like, okay, well, maybe this was just for relaxation. Maybe this wasn't supposed to be published. But I went ahead and got prepared anyways and sent off the queer letter and the 5 chapters to these number of agents that I looked up that seemed to be, I guess, the A-listers for Christian fiction. And to my great surprise, I got 1 rejection letter. I sent out 3. And the second 2 both got back to me immediately, loved what I wrote, wanted to read the whole book. And one of them asked me to send a box, because this is how far back, things haven't changed that much. We're talking about 2008, but they were still like, you get a box and you print the manuscript and you ship it, snail mail, they call it. The other one was like, she didn't want to wait. She's like, can you send it to me online? And I'm like, we're talking about telephone modem. We just, it's super slow. It took the 1 Word file that I sent her 2.5 hours to be delivered from my house to where she was in New York City. And I actually, all night long, I kept going back looking. There's a little blue bar going across the screen that was still happening. I'm thinking, if that thing disconnects and I'll also start over, I'll be here all night. So anyways, it happened. She read it the next day, loved it, absolutely loved it, signed me up, and she had a contract with the major publisher 5 weeks later. And the following Christmas, here I am in Barnes & Noble, my wife taking a picture of me holding a hardback book called The Unfinished Gift. And it's kind of crazy because in some ways, my writing story is fairly unique. I've probably met a couple hundred writers since then, and I haven't met anybody that had an easier time of it. Let's put it that way. I haven't heard of any. Yeah, I feel like I didn't get to pay my dues, so to speak, because here I was, the first book, first attempt, and then that book actually. The ACFW was a fairly large Christian fiction writers, and it got nominated and won Carroll Award for the Best Debut Author and Best Historical Novel. Wow! That year. My goodness! And that kind of sort of, next thing you know, I'm getting asked for interviews and all kinds of stuff, Christian magazines, and my publisher had a publicist that was assigned to me who I'd get contact. So I was still a pastor then. And this is what I'm doing things on my day off. Mostly, I schedule things. But what wound up happening was they said you have what else do you have? Because you can't just have 1 book. You can't write like this and have 1 book. And I only had the 1 book. I had no thought of. I was writing to relax. There was no sense of it could be a career or something. I certainly wasn't thinking I would at some point stop being a pastor and do this instead. Although I loved it. And now you're under pressure again now. Yeah. So I wound up. Because someone wants something. They were basically like, not quite begging me, but really come up with something. And so my wife and I came up with an idea, a sequel to the first book. Wrote the first 75 pages, then called my agent. She loved it. she pitched it to them and they bought it. And then I finished it, and that came out. And when that came out the next year, all the bloggers and stuff, I guess anticipating the sequel to this award-winning debut book, got a lot of attention. And because of the romance aspect of, I guess, I started getting compared to Nicholas Sparks. And people were actually calling me, the Nicholas Sparks of Christian fiction. And my publisher loved that. And they thought, this could be your brand. This is how we'll brand you and help you set apart, as a male author who's able to write, emotional, dramatic stories that, and of course, in my case, I'd never read Nicholas Sparks. So I actually went and rented a few of his movies to understand why they were making the connection. And I understood from watching the movies, okay, we write similar stories and with similar type of, like I wouldn't call them love stories. There's a love story romantic subplot that's pretty significant, but I wasn't setting out to write love stories, but I guess the idea of a male writing credible romantic stories, that's where Nicholas Sparks got the, connection. So anyways, it was kind of a little unfortunate for me because of that branding idea. That was all the rage when you go to conferences with branding. And the idea was for the publishers, if we can get readers to connect you with a certain brand, like when they see a Dan Walsh novel, this is what they can expect, right? And kind of like with Nicholas Sparks, he's got quite a few novels out and quite a few made into movies, and they're all similar, And so she's like, the one thing about branding is they don't want you to go outside that, it's pretty defined lane, and they want you to stay in your lane. And I had just written my third book, which was called The Deepest Waters, which was it was set in 1857, based on a true story. I loved it. It also won a Carol Award, but they were like, because of such a long time between back then when you'd write a book and it would come in the shelves, about a year. So when the book comes out, a year has happened for me. So I wrote The Deepest Waters in that year, and then all this Nicholas Sparks stuff came out. And so they basically told me, we love this book, Deepest Waters, but we don't want you to write any more books that are older than World War II. And that's because Nicholas Sparks, and the other thing was, he only writes standalones, so we don't want you to write any more sequels or series. And I was really disappointed because I actually had a sequel for The Deepest Waters all prepared to pitch to them. And they said, no, we want you to stay in this. So thankfully, the Lord gave me, I should say, plenty of, I started having ideas in that lane. And over the next several years, I turned out a total of 12 books for them. They were all in that kind of Nicholas Sparks type genre, including, I think, 2 or 3 Christmas books. So I really enjoyed reading books, but I also had a real desire to write suspense novels, Christian suspense novels, and they didn't want that at all. And so what wound up happening was on about 2012, I think, is when Amazon, it was sort of like the Titanic hit the iceberg. Amazon was growing and building, but it really clobbered traditional publishing in around 2012. They came out with a $99 Kindle. And then shortly after that, they came out with a Kindle app where anybody and everybody could download Kindle for free on their device, tablet or whatever. And then they also came out with Prime, so you could actually get print books for free with no shipping. And it really rocked the industry. And to give you an example, my first royalty statement, 2009, ebooks were 3%. By 2013, they were over 50%. And all of that, was coming off of Amazon mostly. The other thing that was happening was a lot of publishers were starting to go belly up. They couldn't compete. The amount of money they were losing to Amazon was too much to keep up with. And quite a few big name publishers went out of business. I had lots of author friends that were bestsellers, and we're talking, and they just got dropped by their publisher because they're sometimes they're middle of a series of 4 books and they're not going to finish the series and stuff like that. And it was pretty shocking to see. But when I would talk to people, I was going to conferences and even speaking then, and I would, try to get feedback from people. I'd ask them, at the end of I get done speaking, hey, where are you all buying your books these days? How many of you are buying your books from Amazon? And there'd be just kind of like all these hands going up apologetically, almost like, and the next thing I know, almost the whole room was filled with people who were buying online. And quite a few of them, as we chatted,
Right.
they'd still go to like a bookstore like Barnes and Noble to get the coffee and to check out the books, almost like a showroom. Then they go home and download it on their Kindle. So understandably, the business side of publishing was getting rocked. And so what also people don't realize is my books were selling. They're always making the bestseller list, and they were selling. I think I did the math. By the end of 2014, I'd made, gross over 2 million in sales.
Wow!
But what I was getting paid was a fraction. There were so many hands in the pie. To give you an example, I did the math on one of those books at Barnes and Noble that was like on sale for $10. I did the math, and I was making about $1 of that $10. There's like all these other people getting the other 9. And I remember my wife even had to work full time for us to have health insurance. And here I am on all the bestseller lists, right? And I'm getting all this attention, and they're doing full page ads for my books and all that. And people, I guess, imagine you must, have a yacht and a cabin on the lake. And it's like, no, it's not that. We're not seeing that kind of income. And I was doing okay. We weren't starving, but it wasn't anything like wealthy or anything close. And so I realized what probably became the big clinch for me to switch and to leave the publisher formally was it came time to renew the contract at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. And I had decided to pitch to them again. This was a suspense series I wanted to write, starting with this book called When Night Comes. And I had the whole thing, roughed out. And they loved the idea, they loved the concept. And if that was my brand, they probably would have said yes. They had other writers writing suspense, but that wasn't me. My brand was this. And the other one was a series, a dog series, shelter dog series. They said, we're really not interested in dog books right now. They're not selling right now very well. What else you got? And so my wife and I were kind of like, that was the first time that they ever said, what else you got? Before everything I turned in, they said yes. So I kind of realized, all right, maybe this is the Lord. We prayed about it and decided I really want to write these books. And so we just, took a chance and said, guys, thanks. It's been a great ride, but I'm not going to renew with you. I'm going to go out on my own and write these books that you have turned down. And so we parted friends, but that was like kind of the end of my official career in traditional publishing world. And I went and that year I published both those books. The When Night Comes and the first of the dog books was called Rescuing Finley. To my great surprise, they didn't flop. They did very well. And my income took a hit because I had no advance. I was living off the advances. No advances were coming in. It was just the actual sales. But because there was nobody but me and Amazon to split the money with, even though my book sales went down by less than half of what they were, because again, all my books are out. They're no longer in the bookstores. People have to get me online or else. Because I was getting paid per book so much more, at the end of the year we still made it. And by the next year, I added 2 more books. And by the third year, I had 6 books, and I was actually making as much or more than I had made with my publisher in my best years. And and I had the freedom to write books that they said, had turned down, that I loved to write. So now I was writing suspense books half the year, and the sort of Nicholas Sparks type book, which was the dog books, the other half the year. And I continued on doing that really till now. And now I'm, like I said, up to 30 books almost. And I've actually, because they weren't promoting my other books at all after I left, the sales of those books fell so far down, less than $200 a year, that I was able to get the rights back. And then I was able to re-release those books under my own imprint, new covers, same name, same title, but they took off. Because I also lowered the price. Since I didn't have to charge what they charge, I lowered the price to what I was charging for my books, and they just took off. And also they were on Kindle Unlimited, and so my income almost doubled that year, adding all those books. It's almost as if I written 8 new books in 1 year, because they were not making any money for like 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden, I found out nobody cared that they were published, a while ago.
Right.
They just, gobbled them up. So it's been, for me, it's been a good experience overall. being what you call an indie. I wear a lot more hats. I don't have a staff. I was fairly entrepreneurial. Being a pastor of a small church for 25 years, I got kind of used to doing things, that maybe weren't my priority job. So I do all my own covers. My wife is my editor, but she was really my editor back then. Even though I had an editor with a publisher, she always was my de facto editor. Everything I wrote, I went through her. She's the reason I really believe, honestly. I believe she's the reason I have whatever success I have, because all of those scenes with women in it. One of the biggest problems women have in reading books written by men is we don't get women right. And they can tell when they're reading, and the women characters are talking and saying and feeling, they don't come off accurate. Or I found that out.
Right.
I found that out at the stage when nothing was being seen by anyone but her. So I would run things by her, and she would routinely say, "Love that scene, love what you said, but what you had that woman said, she would never say that. She wouldn't even think."
Yeah.
And I'd say, "Okay, what would she say? What would she think?" And she'd tell me, and I would change it. And that got to be the norm for us, where she would just routinely give me great advice on all the female characters and all the roles, especially if you think about the idea of building and simmering a romance over, half a book. Guys aren't known to be romantic. Let's put it that way. It's the candy and the flowers, twice a year. And, they're not necessarily all that, and so she would really help me to learn how to simmer that romance in a way that really was. What happened was, like, my female audience grew dramatically. It wasn't just guys reading my books, and eventually became a non-issue that I was a male. I had just as many women read, more so. And when you read the reviews, they loved it. They loved the books. They loved even when the suspense books started coming out. Everybody said, "Oh, they're going to turn on you because they're expecting your quote brand, right? You're the Nicholas Sparks,
right?
Suspense from you." Well, not only did that one book do well, it turned into 4 books series. And then I wound up writing a sequel 4-book series off of that first series, again, because the appetite for these books was so strong. So they got it wrong on both counts. The dog books are my best sellers. I mean, that one book that they turned down, Rescuing Finley, has over 5,000 Amazon reviews, over 5,000 5 stars. And the whole series has 14,000 reviews. People loved it. And again, thankfully, I didn't have to split all that income with all these other people.
Yeah.
So it's also helped us out financially. And that's why I've been able to keep writing, really, all these years. So that's probably more than you're asking for.
Well, that certainly gave us a very broad umbrella and was very interesting. I did look at on Amazon and looked at your books, your Forever Home series, as Finley, Bailey, Riley, and Parker.
Right, and then the last one, Keeping Bailey.
I guess you could say that Dan Walsh went to the dogs.
Yeah, those books actually. The reason I got the idea for my wife, after I left being a pastor, and she had all those years been a pastor's wife, which wasn't in our network a paid position, but she worked hard and she did a lot of things as a pastor's wife, and her whole life between that and being a mom for all those years, homeschooling. So I said to her, Cindy, now that we're kind of freed up, what would you like to do? You have time now in your life. What would you? And she said she'd always loved animals. She always loved dogs. She wanted to be a dog trainer. And so I said, go for it. We have some money now. We have time. Nobody's. And so she spent the next 2 years getting trained to become a dog trainer and aced all her classes. And then she got a job basically developing the dog training for our local Humane Society. So the dog series that you're mentioning, which we call the shelter, we call it the Forever Home, because that's what the language they want to find every dog a forever home. And that's why we called it that. The other nickname for it is the Shelter Dog series, or Rescue Dog series, because all 4 of the dogs were dogs that came from a shelter situation and were rescued by someone. But it was all the stories that she's telling me. We're coming home and she's got all kinds of stories of all these different dog things. Just the two of us were empty nesters at this point, and I got the idea that for writing that book, the first one, and I kind of asked her, "Would you be my expert, advisor?" And she said, "Sure, I'd love to." And wrote the book. And of course, like I said, just like she was reading every chapter and pointing out, dog wouldn't do that, dog wouldn't say that, dog wouldn't think that, And I was able to actually, we made the book's fun. I was able to actually include in my writing, one of the things I guess I'm kind of known for about my characters is there's the level of writing where you're talking about what or in fiction, you're describing the scene. So you're doing the setting. There's dialogue, what the characters are saying. There's action, what the characters are doing. All of my books from the very first have another layer, which would be what the characters are thinking and feeling. And in every scene that I write, I always write a scene and or chapter through one point of view, whatever character I pick. And so the reader is inside that character's head for the entirety of the chapter, sometimes many chapters. But because of that, I'm not just, you're seeing the typical setting and dialogue and action, but I'm also telling the characters what the character is thinking and feeling about everything that's happening. So when I got to the dog books, it was a little bit like, okay, because of Cindy and her expertise in dog psychology, I decided to keep that going. And so actually readers get, I guess you say, treated to in those books. While everything's happening, there are scenes that are from the dog's point of view, what the dog is thinking and feeling and how the dog's processing what's happening to it. And that's some of when reading the reviews, that's some of the stuff that the readers loved about those books. And the nice thing about it was, as best as we can know scientifically, it's accurate. The stuff that I'm including there wasn't just made up, out of imagination. Mm-hmm. It was actually based on dog science. But it was fun. It made it really fun for me to have the dog get that much.
Sure.
So it may be part of the reason why they are my all-time best-selling books of all my 29. None are even close, really, in terms of overall income and reviews. So people really, I feel so bad in some ways for my publisher saying, people aren't buying dog books right now. I'm like, they're my all-time bestsellers. You guys turned down something that would have made you a fortune.
You have covered a lot of the questions that I normally cover, but I have my teleprompter up here, which often prompts me in the wrong direction. I go down rabbit trails, but so you live in around Daytona Beach, is that correct?
Yes. We actually live in a town called Port Orange, just south of Daytona, but nobody's ever heard of it. So I always just tell people the Daytona Beach area. But for example, we live close enough. Yeah. They just had the 500 a few weeks ago. We live close enough to the raceway that on our front porch, we can hear the cars like they're 2 blocks away. When the fireworks go off at the end, we can look up and see them in the sky. So, the blimp, we look up when those Thunderbirds flew over. We actually were able to see the Thunderbirds fly over. So, oddly enough, we're not race fans. We lived in the heart.
Well, you don't have to be in a way.
We've been to a few of the races, but neither one of us got bit by the bug. And honestly, we're glad people are so happy with it, but we don't get it. I don't get it. To me, it's the most exciting 15 minutes in sports. But after 15 minutes, both of us were looking at each other like, I was like, I'm not picking up on all the adulation. So, we generally, when the races are happening, that's our turn to kind of avoid that part of town because of all the traffic. So I'm sure people who, I might be losing some of my readers by confessing that. A lot of NASCAR fans might have just been horrified what I just said, but yeah.
I'm sure that they can get around that, I'm sure. Is there some place in nature that you like to go every once in a while to kind of recharge your batteries?
Oh, the beach. We are, thankfully, as we are close to the raceway, we're equally close in another direction to the beach. It's a 10-minute drive for us to be, and Daytona has a beautiful beach. It's the town you know, a lot of towns tend to be somewhat circular or rectangular. You know, they grow out kind of from the center. Well, the Daytona is everybody wants to be on the water. So we have the beach, and then maybe 3 blocks in from the beach, there's the intercoastal waterway divides the north-south, divides the town up. So there's like a series of like 6, 8 bridges going from one end to the other. So the shape of the town is like 4 miles from the inland from the beach and like 25 miles long. It's like the shape is just because everybody wants to be either on the river or on the beach. And of course, from a tourist standpoint, there's a section of town where the tourists all go, and that becomes packed, and spring break and races and all the other stuff. Mm-hmm. We live south of that, is very uncrowded, and we can drive down to the beach at any time and take nice long walks with this, handful of people there, just soaking in the sun and swimming, and mostly there's like some condos and some really fancy beach houses. But so we get to go to the beach, and that's for both of us would be, where we love. You can't hardly. It's almost to me. I've been to the mountains. I think the mountains have an equal effect to me in terms of just you're so overwhelmed by the beauty of God and His creation that you can't hardly think about your little problems or anything going on. This is so overwhelming. And the beach is like that. And here I am, 67. I've lived here since I was in 3rd grade, and I still feel that way. If I take a walk on the beach, half hour later, we're like so refreshed. Sometimes we'll just get our chairs and sit them in the beginning of the thing. We got, now, of course, being old, we got chairs with a little shade over so we don't get skin cancer and stuff like that, But we can just sit there and just people walk by, and you don't have to be doing anything, and it's so refreshing. So yeah, we're living where people spend a fortune to come to vacation, and we get to just drive 10 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah. So a little bit off of center for most interviews, probably. What are your 3 favorite songs?
3 favorite songs. Now, here's the thing. I have, obviously, there's Christian songs that I love. But my wife and I also really enjoy the old-time classics. We got into it for a while. Music is a very big part of our existence. We bought a subscription to Kindle, not Kindle, Music Unlimited from Amazon, so that you could basically have access to any song almost that's available for $15 a month. And we created just a number of playlists for all different kinds of music. We have, obviously ones for, I've got a Christian fiction playlist, but there's all kinds of the old time classics that I go back. When we came to Christ, I don't know if you saw the movie Jesus Revolution that came out last year.
Yeah.
But that was the era we got saved in. And like even the people featuring that music, Love Song, Chuck Girard, and all the Paul Clark, so Phil Keaggy, these were all people we listened to in our youth. We were probably in our teens and really the early years of our marriage. So I have playlists for that. I have playlists for quiet time music. I have playlists for the best Christian music that I like. Because you can select a song, any song you like, you can make a playlist for it. But we also have, like we both developed it somewhere about 20 years ago, just for exercise and fun. We took up dancing. And kind of dancing, like ballroom dancing, and that was probably an era where we started getting really into the crooners, like the Sinatra. But then, all the well-known crooners. But then there's been a whole series of more modern crooners, like Michael Bublé and Harry Connick Jr. and ones like that, who basically have taken, they call them the standards, these sort of romantic songs from that era, and have redone them, very much keeping them like they were, just with new lyrics and whatever. So we've made playlists like that. I love instrumental music. I have a whole series of playlists of some of the best movie themed music that it's all instrumental. Like for example, it's odd, but like if somebody gets a chance to listen to the theme music for The Last of the Mohicans, it comes to mind. It's an amazing, beautiful instrumental song, and I have like 3 or 4 songs off that movie. So I have a whole playlist that's probably an hour and a half, 2 hours long. So when I'm writing, for example, that kind of music I can listen to. The problem with me, I also sing, and I'm not like I don't sing well enough to have I can get a clap in a karaoke session, but I'm not going to record anything. But because I sing, and I used to sing in church, I was part of the worship group, whatever. The problem is when I listen to music where they're singing, I get distracted because I find myself singing. So I can't listen to music with words when I'm writing. But those instrumental songs, I can play that in the background. And some of them are just, there's one guy named Hauser who's come out and was like, he's a cello player. We have a whole playlist of his cello music. He just takes all these classic with an orchestra, and he's like, instead of singing, he just plays this cello. It's just beautiful, beautiful music. And it just, so again, it's not, the top 3 songs is kind of hard for me to pick. I feel like I'm a little bit all over the road. I don't know that I have like.
Oh, the question was to design discussion and insight rather than write down your 3 top songs. So that accomplished it. We got a good discussion out of that.
All right.
Well, how about your 3 favorite movies?
3 favorite movies. Okay. Well, It's a Wonderful Life. I've seen that movie 50 times, virtually more than that maybe. So that has to be rated the favorite, even though it's Christmas. Lots of movies I've seen multiple times. I'm trying to think of right off the top of my head. I wish I had known this question. I might have done a little bit more thought. But what I can think of is movies that I've seen many times. Like we watch, I'll give you an example, Pride and Prejudice. It's actually not a movie. It's a 5-part series that the BBC, I guess, did. And it's one that's 5 parts. There have been movies about Pride and Prejudice, but the production, it has 5 parts. We've probably watched that. We just watched it again a month ago. It came out in the 90s. I've probably seen that a dozen times. And I always allow some years to go in between when you watch it. And it's just amazing. Jane Austen's writing, I would call it genius level writing. It inspires me as a writer. It's hard for me to fathom when you learn about her life, how short it was and how troubled it was in some ways. But her books were just amazing. So, yeah, that would definitely be, I think probably Band of Brothers, the 10-part HBO series. I've seen that 7 or 8 times. It really deeply affects me. We just watched another movie that we saw. It's kind of like when we watch a movie, we say, is it too soon to watch it again? And we'll be picking up one from a while ago. And there's another movie I haven't seen in a while, but The Man from Snowy River, the first one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched that. We'll probably watch that every 3 or 4 years. It's just such a classy movie, and beautiful scenery, beautiful music, beautiful story. Romance is top shelf without being over.
I like the sound effects, the rolling thunder.
Yes.
And then of course there's that exciting scene when he goes over the cliff on the horse and his stirrups are down about the horse's ears because he's standing and leaning back on his rump.
Last of the Mohicans, I mentioned the music. I watch that every few years. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of, as far as more of the modern movies, they don't seem to have that compelling, lasting effect. Like when I watch them, it's probably like you, like a lot of people who are church-going Christian believers, you're sometimes having a hard time finding movies that, at least made in the Hollywood realm, that, are as good as the classic movies. They seem like a lot more too superficial, and the bad guys are too dark. And that's one thing that's kind of hard these days is, even as a writer, my son and I have talked about this because he's a writer too. He writes scripts though, but that his generation post 9/11 that grew up after 9/11, they're just very dark. And we grew up learning about the flawed hero. You have the original Disney movies where the hero was just perfect, right? Happy ending. Then you had the era we grew up with, the flawed hero. He wasn't perfect. He had some flaws, and you saw those unveiled in the. Well, now the hero is just almost as dark as the villain. And sometimes it's hard when you're watching anything modern to even pick somebody to root for, because the good guys got so many flaws that you're like, there's nobody to root for. You're like, and my son has talked about that. They grew up, and some of them too are all about the world ending. They're all apocalyptic, and it's always like the world has just fallen apart, and now the movie's what happens after. And there's all kinds of movies, and they write like that because 9/11 kind of their childhood. It was like the whole world to them. They don't expect when they look at the future, they don't expect things to work out. They're all kind of anticipating something's going to happen that's going to destroy the world, and the question is, what will the world be like after? And that's where they maybe get hopeful. In the aftermath, maybe we can do something better than what we have now, because what we have now completely is messed up. So there's not a lot of movies, current modern movies, that we find ourselves too intrigued by. Every now and then, some of these faith-based movies that have been coming out lately have been much more encouraging as far as the quality of them and the storyline. Like we saw in the past year, I saw Reagan. That movie, really loved it. We used to love Ronald Reagan, so it was easy, especially to find a movie that was showing him in a proper light. But even An Unsung Hero was a faith-based movie that didn't have anybody. It was such a good movie. So we definitely have watched some of the faith-based movies that come out recently and been very encouraged by the storytelling and also the quality of the productions.
Are there any humorous or surprising moments that kind of made you stop and ponder it? As you're writing and you see things through your character's eyes, is there something that came up and you say, wow, where did that come from?
The honest answer to that would be more times than I can count. The reason for that would be the way I write, my process. The reviewers call it character-driven stories, which is accurate. I clearly, obviously, have a plot, and the story has a plot, and some are stories are plot-driven, and the characters are feeding and supporting the plot. Action movies are a lot like that, but mine, I create. To me, the story is the thing. My basic motto, when I teach fiction, is that all fiction readers have one desire, and that is to have a great story well told. That's it. A great story well told. That's my goal. You need to come up with a great story and need to tell it well. And part of that, and I would say the largest part of that for fiction, is the characters. People have to care about the characters. And surprisingly, there's a lot of teaching books about fiction that don't teach how to write great characters or what makes for great characters. I had, in the beginning, before I published my first book, not having any conferences or people to talk to, I went out and bought 8 books that were supposed to be all best-selling books on how to write fiction well. And looking back later, when I was teaching fiction myself, I pulled those books out. And I noticed none of them have how to write great characters anywhere. Some of them don't have it at all in a chapter, and some of it may be something towards the end. And I was teaching at a writers' conference, and the topic was the 3 things that matter most to readers. So to find out what those 3 things were, I listed like the 7 components of a novel in a survey, and to all my several thousand people who were following me, and I sent it to them and said, hey, would you answer me this? Just 1, 2, and 3. Just of these 7 things, which of these things matter most? And the one that was the top vote getter, it was in everybody's top 3 list, and it had the number one votes was characters that I care about. And the second popular one was a beginning that grabs you. and the third was an ending that is satisfying. And I found it surprisingly that the plot and other things about it that these books tend to feature weren't even brought up by readers as what matters the most to them. So fortunately for me, the thing that I featured from the very beginning were the characters. My decision was early on, even with the very first book, The Unfinished Gift, if you read the first chapter of that book, you're going to see this little boy in the back seat of a car. And I challenge you not to care deeply about him by the end of that chapter. And then the next chapter is his grandfather, who he's never met, and he's terrified to meet him. And same thing, because when I write from the very beginning, I was adding that layer of what the characters are thinking and feeling as part of the way I wrote. So every one of my books has that element in it, even the suspense books. I'm taking the time to let the character. So it's normal for me when I'm writing. I kind of go into the day with the plot of what is supposed to happen in the chapter today. I kind of know that as I'm sitting down ready to write. But the way I've written is, as soon as the characters become real to me, which they do early on, it maybe take 50 pages, but at some point the characters become from 2D to 3D, and now I know them. From that point on, I let them be in charge. I basically let them be who they are. And so what happens then is every chapter, it's kind of like, almost like I feel like a scribe. Like, here's what has to happen today. Today, this is the scene. And I'll start writing it, and the main character will say something. And it's almost like I feel like I'm looking at this character, and what are you going to say to that? And then they say what they would say based on how I've created them and keeping with who they are. And then the back and forth, the exchange goes. And I'm all the times writing things down that they're saying that are, I guess you call it organic. Some people have used the word, meaning that I didn't know this communication was going to go. And sometimes what I expected the chapter to end with is 3 chapters later we get there, because things that the characters introduced in the conversations were things that I hadn't anticipated, but they're real and they have to be dealt with. As if this story is going to track in a way that's authentic, I can't ignore what these guys have brought up, because I've let them be who they are, and they brought up things that matter. So now I have to include those into the story, even though if you look at my outline, they're not there. So I say, like I said, that happens. What you just described, it doesn't happen every day, but it happens at least once a week, where I'm like, okay, wow, and I've gotten comfortable with it. It's a little messy because you can't control it that much. But my books are never really. It doesn't mean my books turn into 500 pages. My books are rarely more than 300 pages. So it's not like I let just things just go wildly control. It's still riding along. It's kind of like I say, like, instead of taking the highway, we're taking the scenic route. And if we see something interesting, we stop and drive down and take a look at it. That'd be maybe more my style.
So, suppose in chapter 7, your character does something that you hadn't anticipated. Does that require you to go back to chapter 3 and leave a few breadcrumbs?
Sometimes.
Something to.
Yeah, there's definitely times when, if it's significant enough that it would matter, it would be like, it would be disingenuous or whatever not to, because it is a process. I mean, these characters are becoming real. Now, the one thing is, one nice thing, and one reason I like writing series compared to the standalone back with my publisher is, like right now, I'm writing a sequel to the book Perfect Stranger that came out in Thanksgiving. I've heavily invested, 6 months of my life in these people. I got to know them. I know them as better than the people in my neighborhood, right? And I've spent time at their dinner table. I've spent time with their worst situations. And so now writing a sequel, I'm at somewhat of an advantage because I know them well. There's new characters now they'll have to go through that process with, that are coming into the story in the sequel. But that's one of the reasons why I think, writing a series is so much more enjoyable as a writer, because those characters, all that time you've spent, and I think readers like that. That's why, if you think about it, how many TV shows, run 6, 7, 8, 9 seasons? Usually what happens is their characters in this TV shows, people have just grown to love, and they're not bored with them. They just want to, they want the stories to be exciting, keep the edge sharp. but they're not like, I'm so bored with these characters. When are you going to change the characters? They love these characters. So if you create characters that people love, they want to know what happens to them. And that's to your advantage as the writer, because now you don't have to keep reinventing things. You can, I think it makes the task a little easier, in my opinion.
As you say that, I'm thinking of Murder, She Wrote. I don't know how many seasons Angela Lansbury stretched that out, but it's on all the time on certain channels, and you see some of the same characters.
You show like Friends, same thing. Remember the X-Files and I was a sci-fi fan. My wife and I both. It went like 9 seasons and then wound up 11 seasons. Even the main characters were getting tired of. They started bringing in other people to keep it going. People tend to, I think, if they like characters, they don't mind. They don't mind sticking with them. You just have to keep the stories and what's happening in the stories and the conflicts and the problems that are being resolved. And of course, the characters can also grow. They can change and grow as the books go on. You don't want to be exactly the same. Just like in life, there's big things that happen in your life and mine that alter the way you look at life. I've had experiences even recently where I look back on areas of my life with great regret because I didn't know what I know now. So that can happen in your characters too.
How would you like your readers to engage with you?
Well, it seems like I'm on Facebook a lot every day. My readers tend to be older. I don't mean that I don't have young readers, but if you look at judging by the email and it seems to be like Facebook is the platform where most of the baby boomers hang out, and now the younger generation hangs out more on Instagram, and even the younger still on TikTok. But so I've started to try to make a presence on Instagram, but I'm on Facebook all the time because all my readers are there. Sometimes back in the day when Facebook used to be troubled politically, I wanted to leave, but I couldn't because all my readers were there. So I'm on Facebook a lot. If they look me up, I have an author page, and I also have a profile page. One is the difference. One is friends, and the other one's called likes, I guess. But they can also email. I mean, I've remodeled my website this past year, and it used to be my contact on my website didn't work. It didn't get to my emails. So now it does. So if anybody ever wants to go on my website and they want to communicate with me, there's a place to say contact, and that will actually write to my email that I see every day. So if you want to, what is? But I do respond to all my emails. It may not be, sometimes I get a flood of them, and I can't get to all to them the same day or two. But it's not like I get thousands, or I had I usually respond to my emails in a fairly timely way.
So the address to your website is
www.danwalshbooks.com. Kept it simple, danwalshbooks.com. And an easy way to stay in touch with anything happening, especially with these movies that have 2 movies that are coming up that are attempting to be made and hopefully will be made in the next year or so. And I plan to, once that starts, to have like weekly updates on the movie stuff on my newsletter and blog. But if they go to my website, for example, there's a newsletter up, right on the homepage. You scroll down a little bit, you can sign up. I don't send out newsletters a lot. Sometimes it's once a month, sometimes less. Usually it's when a book is on sale or given it free, or some really big thing is happening. I'll let the newsletter people, because I know Facebook. If Facebook is a moment, and then you scroll by and you may have missed. Whereas the newsletter, it's easier for people to for them to get hold of it. So besides Facebook, I would say is the newsletter. Go to my website and sign up for the newsletter. And again, on that same website, up the contact, you can hit the contact button, and that'll go straight to my email. And then once I respond to you, you'll have my email address, and you can just correspond back and forth like we do with email.
Yeah, great. Well, as we this has been a great conversation. As we close out, is there a message you would like to leave with our audience?
Well, obviously for me, I'm a Christian fiction author, it's funny. I almost feel more like an author now than I do as a pastor. The pastor memories are fading, and I seem to relate to life more now as what I've been the last 15 years. And as an author, obviously, I write fiction, but that doesn't mean I'm making stuff up that isn't true. I still believe and firmly believe that the Word of God and is essential, and prayer is essential. I really love what I'm seeing on this resurgence of faith being talked about openly since the election. I'm loving the kind of chance that I'm seeing for young people to rediscover, because I came to Christ as a young person, and sometimes I feel like the church can be a hindrance to young people. If sometimes churches can inadvertently become the blind lead the blind. And I know, having been a pastor, I have times in my life as a pastor I regret, because I feel like the way we were presenting Christ was in a way shifting towards a little legalism, and not the way I love, for example, The Chosen. I always encourage young people and to start watching The Chosen. If you want to know what Jesus was like, what the disciples were like, to me, that's watch The Chosen and read the Gospels and fall in love with Jesus. Recognize Jesus is the vine. Really, apart from a healthy relationship with Christ, there is really no lasting joy or hope day to day in this troubling, difficult time. I would really encourage people to draw near to God, and by that I mean draw near to Christ. And these kinds of tools, I think, can really help. Church is definitely, we still go to church, I believe in church, but church can't replace a vital. It's like the idea of abiding in the branches versus abiding in the vine. The life comes from the vine, and that's what I would really encourage people to consider: Jesus, abiding in Jesus.
Excellent. Could I pray for you?
Oh, sure. Love it. Thanks.
Our Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for people like Dan that takes your word and gives it to people in various forms. He's spent a career in the pulpit, and now he's putting his faith on pages to encourage other people. We just ask that you continue to give him strength, give him wisdom. May his mission prosper, and we give you all the praise, Lord. In thy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, Mike.
Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy writing schedule. It seems like, what is this, the third time you've had to take time out of your busy writing schedule to try to meet this appointment with our viewing audience? But we got it done.
Yeah, I'm glad we made it happen. We'll do it again.
So
enjoyed it.
Yeah. Maybe we'll talk again as your books are made into movies.
Yes, that'll be exciting. Hopefully, I'm hoping to have something real. Everything right now is in the developmental stages, but I hope to have something real to share in the next few months, and we'll definitely maybe get back in touch then. And
It'll be a new chapter.
I'll see you on Facebook, because I get all your feeds. Like when you're doing these things, you show up on the feed. So,
well, I hate to tell you this, but Dan and I continued to talk after I pushed the stop record button, and I kind of wish I'd kept it going, because the guy is fascinating. I picked up some valuable information about what I'm trying to do, my efforts in writing. But, the old cliche, it's going to be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. It's kind of how Dan writes his books, and gives us all something to be happy about and look forward to. So I hope you enjoyed getting to know Dan Walsh a little better. And I hope you enjoy getting to know the authors I present here on the Wordsmith Christian Fiction Podcast. Please support them by buying their books and leaving reviews for them. I'm extremely interested in what you think of this podcast, so please comment with any suggestions you might have, like who would you like for me to have on the next podcast? If you find these podcasts informative, please share them with your friends. If you found them inspirational, please subscribe. If you find them both inspirational and informative, tell the whole wide world any way you can. Don't forget to like us, because I have high hopes for the Wordsmith Forge Christian Fiction podcast. Until the next time, may God bless you abundantly and cover you with His amazing grace. Keep reading clean. This is Mike Baines, out.